Welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival and our program on Dear America, interview with Jose Antonio Vargas. Woo! My name is Kate Campbell King, and I am one of the founders and partners at North Berkeley Investment Partners in, I know you're surprised, North Berkeley. And we're a sponsor of the book festival, have been sponsoring for a number of years. We really love what they're doing and the way they bring people together to talk about issues that are really important and to highlight the people who are making the effort to create the conversation. And Jose, you're one of those people. So I'd like to make sure that people have their cell phones turned off so we don't get interrupted by that sort of thing, or turn the volume down at least. And we're going to get going. We mean to have plenty of time for questions at the end. And so if you have a burning question in the middle of the program, raise your hand and we'll work that in. Otherwise, we'll have time towards the end. So to start out with, Jose, you have had a real kaleidoscope of experiences since you came to the United States 26 years ago?
This August.
This August will be 26 years. We'll say a quarter century, around quarter century. And I want to just start off with the book. We may cover some other things, but I wanted to start off with the book. When you wrote it, something you put in the book was that it was the closest thing you had to freedom. And to me, that meant that you were making a space for yourself by writing this book.
Yes.
and you were using your voice as a citizen. So I was just wondering if you could tell us, what was it that you hoped to communicate using that voice with this book? And what kind of outcome are you hoping you'll achieve?
Well, first of all, hi. Thank you for coming. Thank you. And the other thing I want to say is that I'm actually now a resident of Berkeley. Yeah.
Woohoo!
I live about a mile from here, right on 4th Street, you know, where all those stores are, with the best Japanese paper store ever. Right over there, across the street from probably one of the best Japanese restaurants I've ever had, Japanese food I've ever had. So I'm really happy to be here as a resident, as an undocumented, property-owning resident of Berkeley. I was DMing with the mayor, Jesse, the other day, because I told him I'm in town. And I said, okay, so can I vote? So that's a whole other conversation that's beyond what you're asking.
You know, though, don't ask, don't get.
Don't get. So I wrote the book. I was very intentional. If you have a copy of the book, you can probably tell that the word that's underlined is citizen. I didn't say undocumented immigrant. I didn't say undocumented migrant. I didn't say undocumented American, which is like a phrase that we at Define American have been using, because I wanted to really interrogate what citizen means, what citizenship means, because I actually think it's a concept that unites all of us. It's what unites the Black Lives Matter movement, right, to the women's rights movement, to the Me Too movement, what it means to have full dignity. What connects us to the LGBTQ movement, to the immigrant freedom movement. And so I wanted to really understand what that meant. And I remember, I'm a big James Baldwin fan, as you can probably tell from the subtitle of the book. And I was listening to this interview that Baldwin, thank God for YouTube, there's all these great interviews of Baldwin on YouTube. And Baldwin was saying, he was remembering his friend Malcolm X, who said, wait a second, so if you're a citizen, why do you need to have your civil rights? Right? So Baldwin was questioning this idea of civil rights. If you're a citizen, why do we have to call for your civil rights? Doesn't it mean then that you're not a citizen? And I was an African American studies major with political science at San Francisco State. And so this idea of like citizenship and black liberation has always been kind of foremined for me. But how do you translate that to like the immigrant experience, right? So what I really wanted to do was have this conversation, and I'm gonna be really honest about this. I wanted to have it with myself, right? Like, so I have made like 3 documentaries. The last one was for MTV called White People. You should check it out. That was inspired by a conversation I had in Georgia at the University of Georgia in Athens. One of the first events that I did after I came out as undocumented, one of the kind of a large conservative school, and I got invited by the college Republicans, so I went. And we had this really interesting exchange, and you know how people of color always get asked where we're from? Like, where are you from? So I have this habit now of asking white people where they're from. So then I asked him, I'm like, hey, where are you from? I'm American. Well, okay, great, but where are you from? I'm white. Well, white is not a country. Where are you from? And you know, like when people, because I feel like all of us are all triggering each other. I'll tell you more about what happened in Sonoma. I was just in Sonoma. And it was one of those moments where you could tell that the kid, because he is a kid, a know-it-all kid, but a kid nonetheless, when kind of the defenses dropped, and he was like, I don't know. And I said, well, can you go find out? So how can you obsess over borders and papers when you don't even know how you got here? So that kind of started this journey of like, I made this film for MTV, which was really courageous of them to do business with an undocumented filmmaker and give me complete freedom. So I've made documentaries. I've written for magazines and newspapers like the Chronicle, so it's nice to be in the Chronicle tent. But I've never written a book. So I was asking myself, what's the difference between a New York Times Magazine essay versus a documentary and a book? And then it occurred to me as I read all my favorite books. I reread The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which is one of the best, like, just amazing book. I reread Joan Didion, a lot of Joan Didion. It has to be really interior, right? Like, book, it's a very intimate thing, this thing. You know, it's like this conversation. And so it's really selfish to say this, but I wrote the book to kind of have a conversation with myself about why I'm so fucked up. Oh, sorry, there's kids. Why am I so messed up? How come I can't have intimate relationships with people? Why have I created borders around my relationships with people? And why is it that I've spent my life lying, passing, and hiding, with an emphasis in passing, just so I could exist? So that's what the book for me was about. And thankfully, you get specific enough, it's universal, right? That's the beauty of storytelling. And so that was kind of my goal.
So you had this sort of interior conversation going on. And I think it's really clear in the book because you go back and forth in time.
Yeah.
And you repeat certain things.
Yes.
Which is really nice because you discuss how you have a different perspective. A different perspective develops on the same issue or event over time.
Yep.
And we'll get to Sonoma, which was today. Yesterday and today. But I wanted to kind of reach back in time a little bit because I'm really interested in this issue of where are you from as well. Yeah. From, where are you from?
Yeah.
And how did you come to be? Because we all have family trees, and trees have a lot of branches, and they have a lot of roots, and some go back a long time in one geographic area, maybe still spanning different cultures.
Yeah.
Some come from multiple geographic areas. One of the things that you talked about in your book, kind of locating a piece of, this obsession with documentation, right? Because I I wanted everyone to know that I am a documented American, right? We never say that. We never say,
Yeah.
I'm documented. I'm white. Well, what's white? Okay. Mostly Minnesota, in my case.
Swedish. The
And
Swedish
before
moved to
that,
Minnesota.
yeah, well, little German,
Oh, German. Okay.
Bavaria, English, Scottish, Campbell, yeah, Irish. But in the book, you mentioned the 1965 Naturalization and Immigration Act.
Immigration and Nationality Act, which is responsible for why the country looks the way that it does.
And you also discuss at various moments in time your family tree.
Yeah.
And how your family developed and came to the United States. And I thought that would be interesting, starting with your great uncle Bernie, is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
And his presence as an American in the Philippines and kind of what developed from that and how that law led to all of the things that happened after that.
This is actually really important because this is what the Trump administration is challenging. Right? Every conversation now, and I think for me, one of the more insidious, well, there's a lot of it, but one of the ones that's most undercovered by my colleagues in the news media, who in my opinion, with some exceptions, has done a horrific job covering what's going on, is the reality is now, what the administration wants to do is not only cut, quote unquote, illegal immigration, now they want to cut legal immigration, and they want to stop family unification, which is how so many families here in the Bay Area and California got here. So, you know, any Filipinos here? Can you raise your hand? Great, yay. So, you know, we have huge ass families. So in the Bay Area alone, I have 34 relatives. Mountain View, Milpitas, San Jose, Santa Clara. And out of the 34, I'm the only one who's undocumented. Everybody is either born here, naturalized, or legal permanent residents, right? So, meaning you can't separate the undocumented me from the legal documented them, because we're in the same family. I think that, by the way, that reality is not clear to people. We keep separating legal from illegal when in reality they're in the same household. When in reality the system, you know, so my grandfather was able to come here and work as a security guard, you know, and that's not considered high merit, right? That's not an H-1B visa. He's not an engineer. You know, my grandparents were both, my grandmother, I think got up to 5th grade. She learned English because of Nat King Cole and Ella Fitzgerald songs in the 50s. And my grandfather made it to 6th grade. And so they both came here because my grandfather was petitioned by his sister, who got here because she married a U.S. citizen, Bernie. So then my grandpa's sister, Flory, brought in everybody else. And everybody came legally. Now, when it came time to try to get me, he couldn't petition me because it's not a close enough of a relationship. And my mom was already married, and he couldn't petition her because she was already a married woman. He can only petition her if she were single. Did y'all, like, that's how complicated this is? So then the only solution for my grandfather was to smuggle me, which I didn't know what that was. You know, I basically got at the airport in the Philippines when I was 12, and my mom introduced me to this guy who she said was my uncle. But again, everybody's an uncle. You know, like the Filipino culture is like, everybody's an uncle. So I didn't really think much about the guy because I just assumed he was an uncle. I was more obsessed with the airport because I'd never been inside a plane. I'd never flown. I was just like, you know, I was 12, you know, and in the book, by the way, I really struggled to write about that day I left because there was so much I don't remember. I talked to a doctor about it. He was like, it's kind of a traumatic experience, so maybe you didn't want to remember. The only thing I remembered was I got up, my suitcase was packed. My mother said there was no time to shower. There was no time to brush my teeth. There was a car waiting outside. I get to the airport. This is your uncle. Okay, great. My mom says, here's a jacket. It might be cold there. Because we had just seen Home Alone, the movie. So I guess she thought America was like Home Alone, you know? So she gave me this chunky jacket, and I was like, okay, great. And then that was it. There was no goodbye. There was no kiss. There was no I love you. There was no I'll miss you. There's no I'll see you later. Nothing. How horrible is that? You know, I'm a journalist. Like, I live in words. I couldn't find more words. I'm like, but I can't make this up. You know, I'm not James Fry. So, like, I can't, no offense, but I can't do that. You know, so I had to, and then the journalist in me was thinking, okay, well, maybe I should study what was going on in the Philippine economy in 1993. Like, what was the social, political, social, economic, but that's not true to a 12-year-old, right? And so I wrote it. When you read the book, if you read the book, I guess because, you know, I make films, I write. So structure to me is so important. It's like plumbing, right? When you build a house, like plumbing is the first thing you gotta take care of. So structure is the first thing I took care of. And I really wanted to write this book the way I lived my life, which is that you don't have time to think or to feel. You just go, right? So it moves really fast. And then before you know it, you're like towards the end and it gets really legato, right? Because that's when I'm starting to figure out, oh my God, what the hell happened to me? I didn't really do that until I was arrested in Texas when Obama was president, because people forget that Trump is not the only president who's been detaining and deporting people. This has been a bipartisan mess. And then the first time when I was detained for 8 hours, that was the first time that I wasn't in front of a screen. Because you know, like when they arrest you, I don't know if you know this, but when they arrest you, they take your belt, right? Take your belt off and your shoelaces, because they're afraid that you might use it to hurt yourself. And then they take everything. So since I was a kid, you know, I grew up around computers. So I've always had a computer or an iPhone or something to distract me. So there was no distraction. All I had was myself. And that was when kind of how depressed and kind of how disoriented I was. And to me, a big part of it was being surrounded by all these kids. You know, when I got arrested in 2014, it was during the Central American crisis, right? Back when no one cared. Back when President Obama was like, we should not call them refugees. When Hillary Clinton was being interviewed by Jorge Ramos. And here's Hillary Clinton, by the way, a champion of children's rights her entire career. Jorge Ramos asked her, hey, should those kids be sent back? Hillary Clinton said yes. Why? Because in this country, we can't have empathy towards this. Even Democrats had to look tough, right? So I was arrested and detained, and when I was in that jail cell, because it is a jail cell, we have to stop calling it detention centers. They're jails. So when I was detained, I was surrounded by kids, ages 4 to like 15. And the only thing we had in common was that we had no belts and no shoelaces. And you know, the guard, by the way, everybody in the Border Patrol, all the Border Patrol agents are Latino. I don't want to assume all Mexican, but all Latino. Because, you know, we're in McAllen, Texas. And they spoke Spanish. And so you could see them struggling to look at the kids who were detained. Because I was with the boys. I separated the boys from the girls. And then at some point, the Border Patrol people realized that they had arrested someone kind of prominent. Because I guess it was on CNN. So like they got to the jail cell. Hey, are you this guy? I'm like, yes. And then they would say, you know, they would go to the jail cell, Jose Antonio Vargas. So then all these kids are like, ooh, he speaks Spanish, because Jose Antonio Vargas. And I'm like, no hablo, you know, the only thing I know is, donde está la biblioteca? Like, it's like literally, and you know, my hair was really long, you know, Asian hair, it just goes up. And so they wanted to play with it. And, you know, and I remember like, we were given peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to eat, and apple. They knew what the apple was, manzana. I learned that. Before, but the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, like they didn't know what that was. And then we had Mylar blankets, which was really the only thing protecting us from the floor. And it was like people used it to sleep. So they were playing with that like it was a toy. They didn't know where they were. I knew where they were. I couldn't talk to them because I don't speak Spanish. The Border Patrol people think I'm Spanish. So it's all of this confusion. And then all I could think about was their mom and their dads. Like, what did those parents say to them before they walked by themselves? And of course, as a journalist, of course, I'm thinking that. And then the whole time I'm thinking, don't think about your mom, don't think about your mom, don't think about your mom. And then of course, I have to think about my mom. To me, there's no more dangerous words in the English language than I, me, and my. Especially now that everybody's like so like, we have selfie generation, I, me, and my. I feel like whenever I use I, me, and my, I have to earn it. I have to like actually have done the reporting and the reportage to back that up. And so I just didn't want to have to like deal with myself in that way. And then it was inevitable. It was 8 hours. So I'm thinking about my mom and the fact that what an ungrateful kid I am that I don't remember what happened the last day I saw her. So that, like, I had to like wrap that into the narrative, which was really hard to do, you know, because it's not sympathetic, you know?
I wanted to elaborate on this point about family, you know, and the way that you can be intimate with your family. And whatever your mom did or did not say to you at the airport, right? She had a very intimate relationship with you.
Yes.
And you came here, we're living with your grandparents.
In Mountain View, before Google got there.
Yeah. Pre-Google, you were one of the original inhabitants of Mountain View.
Yes.
And you had some aunts and uncles around.
Yep.
You arrived at the age of 12, landed in junior high, went on to high school there. And you were really busy becoming a good citizen and making sure you could communicate with people, developing a wide network of friends and mentors outside of your family.
Yeah.
And I'm going to fast forward just because we only have so much time today. Later in the book, you talk about your 30th birthday party.
Oh, I called it I might get deported 30th birthday party.
Yeah. And there was a lot going on there because you were trying to bring together different communities that were really your family.
Yeah.
Your family developed over many times and many places. And I just wondered if you could talk about that background and what led to that party and what that was like.
Thanks for asking that. No one really asked me about that. So when I found that I was undocumented when I was 16, I was just really mad at my grandparents. And again, this is gonna sound so selfish, you know, and I'm not gonna use my age as an excuse, but I was so resentful that they didn't think it through, right? Their plan was get me here illegally. I would work at the flea market on Berriesa Road in San Jose as a janitor. I would marry a woman, and poof, I'd become an American. So then I had to tell them that I'm gay. So, you know, that complicated that. But I was mad that even though they thought they were giving me a better life, their idea of a better life was limited by what they didn't know and what they knew. Right? So college wasn't part of the equation, right? We live a life in America that is like, it's almost like even though they had, the irony is this, even though my grandparents had papers, they lived their lives like they're just here to work. They're just labor, you know? And our relationship in my Filipino family was very much, there's a lot of love, of course, but I think a lot of it is hidden by consumerism, what we just buy each other. You know when people say that immigrants are not assimilating? Well, let's define assimilation. If you define assimilation by like Macy's, Gap, and Costco cards, like we're good, right? Like we have completely assimilated into consumerism. But maybe this is what gets lost in the travel, is like what we want, who we are, what kind of life we want here. There's no time to talk about any of that. So I was lucky that I grew up in Mountain View, near Los Altos, where there was a store called Andronicos. Do you know what that is?
Yes, we do.
I'm like, what is this store? Like, what is that walnut? What is a walnut? I mean, you know, like, we don't see that at Safeway. I mean, at least my Safeway, we didn't see that. Like, it was all these, like, really uppity food. And next to the uppity food and the cashier was the New Yorker, which was like a mystery to me. Like, it was the only magazine I opened up with no photos. It was just text. And it was like $10 words text. You know, you have to like it was, you know, before Google. So you have to get the dictionary to try to know what the hell flabbergasted is or whatever. Pissed, flabbergasted, discerning, what? But because I had mentors who happened to be all white, because I grew up in a community that was, at the time, majority white. I had proximity not only to whiteness, I had proximity to wealth, right? I'm saying this, by the way, because I mentor a few people now, like dreamers particularly, who live in areas that there's no access to wealth or to white people or to both. And the first time they get to meet someone white is like when they get to college. And then there's this dance about like, can we trust white people, right? And so for me, I got that at freshman year. So that was in many ways, they were even though my grandparents, my US citizen naturalized grandparents were scared every time I did something that was successful because they thought it was too much of a risk. My white mentors were like, oh my God, keep going, go, just go. When I got offered a job at the Washington Post, my grandparents were like, what are you doing? Like, no, don't do that. That's all the way over there. Rich Fisher, my high school superintendent, was like, Jose, that's all the president's men. And I'm like, what is that? I didn't even know what that was. So I thought I had to keep them separate. It wasn't until that 30th birthday party when I decided that I was gonna come out and I thought I would get deported. So I threw this party and I called it I Might Get Deported Party. And I figured the Filipino people had to meet the white people and the black people. Because my mentors, I don't know how this happened, but I just happened to be mentored by black female journalists. So they flew from DC to be here with me. We actually had it in San Francisco at the party. And I just wanted them all to see each other because if something bad happened to me, I wanted them to have access to each other. But you know the mistake I made? I made this assumption thinking that they would have nothing in common. Like my grandma, this is, limited English. I was like, how is she gonna talk to people? And I guess they do have something in common. They had me in common. But I didn't think about that until I saw them in this one Indian, we had an Indian food, in this one restaurant. In many ways, I think I underestimated the connection. So that was kind of for me, it was an interesting kind of insight to find out about myself and about how maybe I separated them not for their sake, I separated them for my sake. Because it was easier to just say, okay, that's my life, this is the other life. But this is why the closet is so, the undocumented closet, the gay closet, whatever closet, like it's just, it's like going to the Container Store and you're like, what? Where do I go? What cabinets? And you don't know what to open.
And then you find something and you think, this is cool. How can I use it?
Yes.
I don't know. Well, I think it's a wonderful insight thinking about all the different people in your life and the fact that what they have in common is you. And the idea that the things you've done, the voice you have, the book you've written, the movies you've made, this all provides different people with a lens into your life, and it also provides them with a lens into the issues that you really care about and the things that you've experienced. And I'm curious about, I thought maybe we'd go down the road of applying to college. And there are a lot of, as you're saying, there are a lot of dreamers, for instance, who are in communities where they don't have access to white people, they don't have access to wealth, they may not have access to a lot of educated, highly educated people in their community, and they go to college, and it's a completely different environment. It's a little bit like going to a foreign country.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of programs out there for folks that have never been to college before, who are coming from families and communities that don't have that background and don't have that experience. And if you are undocumented, that adds another layer of, it makes more problematic, that process. So can you talk a little bit about your process and Jim Strand and what was done there and your continued involvement in that effort?
So I wasn't planning to go to college at all because, I found out freshman year that I was undocumented, so there was no point. And I found out this was in '97. So then the college counselor, I just went there and just, how do you get scholarships? Well, you need these sets of documents. And I knew I didn't have them, so there was no point for applying to college. And so I wasn't even in my head. I started dropping out of AP classes, honors classes, because what was the point? I never took the SATs. Because I was kind of traumatized by this idea that I don't have the right social security number, so I didn't want any other numbers to be associated with me. No SAT scores, nothing. And I just started writing for the paper, for the school paper and for the local paper. And the only reason I did that was because now this is gonna sound really crazy. When I was 16, I thought if I don't have the right papers because I'm not supposed to be here, well, what if my name was on the newspaper? So I thought that was existing, right? Like the byline on the newspaper was proof that I was here. So that was the only reason why I became a journalist. And then when I was a senior, my high school principal, Pat Hyland, started inquiring about why I wasn't gonna go to college. And so then I finally had to come out to her as undocumented. And then she told the superintendent, who then told the school board president, who then told, and mind you, I was like 3.4 GPA, which is like nothing now compared, these students now are like 4 points, I mean, I can't even. So, you know, it wasn't like I was a stellar student, but they wanted me to go to college. And at one point they tried to adopt me. Like 5 people tried to adopt me. And then they talked to lawyers and the lawyers were like, it's too late. He's already 18, or yeah. So even if you adopted him, he couldn't adjust the status. So then they found a guy whose kids went to my high school who wanted to start a scholarship fund that didn't care about immigration status. Not that he did it for people like me, because back then, this was 1999, 2000. There was no language around this. There was no Dream Act, there was no Dreamers, there was no, you know, there wasn't, we were still stuck in kind of the Pete Wilson 187 era, right? You know what I'm talking about. So they were the ones that found me a scholarship. So this guy, Jim Strand, who I didn't know at all, sent me to college for 4 years. That's why I'm a big proponent of having scholarships that go on for 4 years, so that you're not living your life every year scared of not getting anything. Mind you, when I went to San Francisco State, it was $850 a semester. I'm mentoring this, I sent somebody to school recently there, and it was like $3,400. And I was like, what? Like, so I was really lucky. And by the way, this is actually connected to something that we started at Define American, and I hope you check it out. So we have chapters across the country. There's a guy at Harvard who started a chapter, a Define American chapter at Harvard. I met him when I got invited by college Republicans. See, there's a theme here. When Republicans invite me, I show up. Sometimes with security. So I went to Harvard to meet with the college Republicans. I brought the guy who started the college chapter. His name is Jin Park, who's Korean. 1 out of 7 Koreans is here without papers, 1 out of 7. And then got to be friendly with Jin. And Jin said, I want to apply for the Rhodes Scholarship, which is a prestigious scholarship, as you may know. But the scholarship requires US citizenship. So that's everything about the Rhodes he qualified for, but the citizenship requirement. So I wrote a letter. Define American basically supported his application, and he's ended up becoming the first undocumented Rhodes Scholar. But since I'm very sensitive to this idea that I don't want people to think that this is like more deserving, more high-skilled, good immigrant, because, you know, Asian people, by the way, all the non-Asian people here, can you stop projecting your model minority myth on us? Just quit it. Stop. It's really hurtful. This good immigrant model minority thing that we got going on. So we didn't want to make it all about that. So now at Define American, we actually started a national campaign. It's called Scholarships for All, that is challenging every scholarship and fellowship. I don't care if it's the Kiwanis Club in Des Moines, Iowa, or the art fellowship that you have in Oakland. Are you checking your citizenship requirements? When you say that people have to be a US citizen or a permanent resident to apply, what does that mean to you? So we started that recently, and that's just gonna snowball. And I think this is our chance to, again, kind of interrogate this idea of who gets to apply and who gets to be a citizen. Yeah.
So can you back up a little bit for folks who might not know what Define American is as an organization and how it got started and and your role there?
So the moment I came out as undocumented, I'm a journalist, so I know how journalists think.
2011.
When Obama was president, when Obama was deporting 400,000 immigrants a year, right? So I said, I prepared for the worst, and I didn't know what was gonna happen, but I know how journalists think, because I grew up in newsrooms my entire life. So I knew that the moment I came out, they were gonna make just me the story. So and of course they care about it for 3 days, and then it stops, and then we just move on. right? Like we have ADD, all of us. That's why we have this president, by the way, because we have ADD. So I knew that that was going to happen. So I wanted to start an organization that would collect other people's stories so we could complicate what this is. And my inspiration really is the LGBTQ movement, right? Like the coming out of people. Ellen DeGeneres on the cover of Time magazine. Will and Grace, the #1 television show, right? For like 5 seasons. Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, the first version, not the Netflix one. Like all of that was about seeing LGBTQ people as human beings, not as policy positions, right? So that's kind of our model. So at Define American, there's enough people fighting for immigration reform. I don't even know what that means. Thankfully, there are people providing legal services, which is more important than ever. I was just in Sonoma. There's an organization called La Luz Center, which is an amazing organization for the Latino community in Sonoma. 37,000 undocumented people in Sonoma. A lot of the vineyards rely on undocumented labor. So there's people doing that work. What no one was doing was going to news organizations saying, can you stop using the term chain migration, right? No one was going to Hollywood and saying, when you put undocumented or immigrant stories on television shows, right, how do you portray it accurately? Can we stop making this all about Mexicans? I actually think we owe the Mexican people in this country an apology, right, for having racialized this as much as we have. One little anecdote about this. So when Trump ended DACA, remember he announced on Twitter that I'm ending DACA? So one of the people I heard from was Shonda Rhimes, because Shonda Rhimes is amazing. So Shonda Rhimes said, hey, how can we help? How can I help? And I said, well, there's about 100 undocumented medical students that we know of. Can we get them to your writer's room? So we sent 3 undocumented medical students to the writer's room of Grey's Anatomy, and her writers made a storyline of this undocumented medical intern, and ICE shows up in the ER. The New York Times published a study right after the 2016 election that said, the television show you watch is a greater indicator of who you voted for than the political party you belong to. And Grey's Anatomy is one of the top 5 shows for Trump voters. So we reach more people being on Grey's Anatomy than we did being on Fox News or MSNBC or CNN. So that's a really big part of our work.
And that's fascinating.
Yeah.
You know, when you talk about taking a cue from the LGBTQ movement and the fact that you need to change culture in order to change perspective. I mean, you can't just give people a piece of information. We really need to change the culture. And in my mind, that's what really true integration is all about. I wanted to ask a little bit about, you know, the media, right? And we love to hate the media, but, you know, it really gets the word out. I currently have a Bolivian exchange student. We have living in our household. It's been a really terrific experience. He learned, I mean, he's seen more United States American television shows than I have, and I do have 2 teenagers, so I've seen a lot of shows too. And he's learned an amazing set of things from that, and his English is astonishing. And I know that over the years, you've used New York Times, Politico, your documentary Undocumented was on CNN, and this piece about what you just mentioned about Grey's Anatomy, fascinating to me. You know, do you feel like the impact that the media can have is essentially a positive one, or do you think it can be a negative one? I mean, you also talked about, you know, being on screens all the time, and you perfected your own accent.
Yeah, by watching Bill Moyer on PBS.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been rereading Marshall McLuhan a lot, just because I really want to try to understand the moment that we're in. And I have really forced myself as a content person to be fluent in different mediums, right? And I've also forced myself to go on Fox News as much as my eyebrows can handle and to go on conservative talk radio, right? I remember in the beginning when I started going on Bill O'Reilly's show, people on the left started protesting me, saying, what are you doing going on Fox News? Because a lot of people watch it. right? And they thought we were trying to delegitimize them. Like, well, you know, before I came out as undocumented, I was a political reporter. I had to, you know, cover Sarah Palin and John McCain, and like people watch Fox News. And until they create a better Fox News, I got to go deal with the one that's right there. So I have tried to really be as thoughtful about how fragmented and divisive the media atmosphere is, and try to figure out how can we effectively exist without feeling like we have to prostitute our humanity to people. Like, I'm not here to convince you that I'm human. I know that I am. I know that my life is worth more than pieces of papers and laws that people don't even understand. So you're in charge of your own ignorance, you're in charge of your own knowledge, right? But our job is to try to figure out how can we reach people outside of bubbles. That's a big one. And you know, I'm in the United Republic of Berkeley. And I've chosen to live here because I love Berkeley Bowl. And can somebody explain to me why there's so many lighting stores? What is up with this? There's like 6 on San Pablo. I was like, what? Why do people have... Okay, but you know. The tile stores are amazing. I love the tile stores. They're great. But like, how do we... To me, part of citizenship is knowing that I have a right to stand up straight and sit up straight while knowing that I'm never the only person in the room. Right? That we exist with each other. So our media strategy has been kind of informed by that. You know, like how do we make sure that when we talk about immigration, we're talking about black immigrants? That's a big one. Right? Because Caribbeans and Africans get left out. How do we make sure when we talk about immigration that we bring white people into the conversation? You know, the person who runs Define American day to day, our executive director, is a guy named Ryan Eller, Reverend Ryan Eller, who grew up in Appalachia, who lives in Kentucky, who's a Baptist minister. When I hired him, a few people from the immigrant rights movement was like, why do you have a white guy running your organization? I don't know, because white guys exist, especially Southern ones. It doesn't mean that I don't hire Latin people or Asian people or black people. It just means that when we say Define American, we actually have to live up to that. I don't think at Define American we've done a good enough of a job really engaging the Native American community. 2 years ago, we did a convening. It was the first time we've done this. Like, we had a 2-day convening at the Kennedy Center of undocumented immigrant leaders and Native American tribal leaders for 2 days. And the convening was land and citizenship. I really feel that we can't talk about this issue unless we include everybody. And again, that's beside progressive and conservative. And for the progressives who are here, I kind of have some bad news about this. There was a study that immigrant rights groups have done recently that tried to figure out how much of a priority immigration is for progressives. We're not even in the top 5, right? You know what's higher? Legalizing marijuana, which is amazing. Congratulations. Great. Right? The state of Oregon, where I got my license from, the same year that they made marijuana legal, they took away undocumented Oregonians' right to drive. And again, maybe I should try weed because I'm all like, you know, I mean, I'm pretty tense, so weed apparently will lighten me up. But since I was a kid, I always like, people think you're undocumented, you're illegal, so I didn't want to do other illegal things. And so I'm like, I can't do anything. But now it's legal, so maybe, you know. Again, I think it's great that, you know, legalization of marijuana is important, but legalizing people too, I think, is also important. So how can we do those things together? How do we connect them? Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Well, I wanted to pick up on that issue and some of the phraseology that surrounds all of this. The one that I really dislike is illegal alien, you know? Yeah. Number one, people are not illegal, and they're also not aliens. So we hope. And yeah. You know, there's a panoply of words that are used that affect how we think about it.
Absolutely.
And there is, and as you say, it's not in the top 5 concerns, and part of the reason is that it's not really very visible in our day-to-day discourse. And Trump took over the airwaves by saying he was going to stop illegal immigration, and we started with the problem of Muslim
Yep.
immigration, and we've kind of gotten away from that in the news story as it's developed. But we don't really know the extent of immigration. How many people are here? You've cited for us a couple times how many people were deported under Obama. There's a lot of volume out there, and how do the words that we use to describe it obscure what's happening?
I think it's, I actually think the language, this is where Toni Morrison to me is such an oracle. I love Toni Morrison. I actually, when I was writing my book, I wrote the book, by the way, thinking I was gonna leave, right? I was gonna take the book advance, and it's called Define American. I didn't call it the Jose Antonio Vargas Foundation, so it doesn't need me to be here. And to be honest, I'm 38. I was 37 when I was writing the book, and I was getting really scared that I was gonna be this immigration guy for the rest of my natural life. And my interest is broader than that. Like, if I'm not free creatively, then there's no reason to stay. I have to be free. So then I wrote the book wanting to free myself from this and thinking of leaving, and I used a Toni Morrison quote at the top of my computer when I was writing the book to remind myself what I was doing. And the quote is, "I stood at the border, stood at the edge, and claimed it as central, and forced the world to move to where I was." So how do I write about myself without feeling like I have to justify my illegal alienness to people, right? Because what you actually choose to call me says a lot more about you than it does about me. So that was for me, that was a big insight. And the language of this issue, in the same way in the book, I was in Kansas City and some people got really mad about this passage in the book. I was talking about this idea that why is it that when people of color move, we're immigrants and migrants and refugees, when white people move, they're expats, right? And there are actually more Americans going to Mexico than there are Mexicans going to the United States. We don't hear about that. Because it's only a crisis when all these people of color move. And then in the book, I talked about, I was in North Carolina for another conservative event in Wilmington. And there was this guy, I said that there's, I'm proud of being Filipino, and I said there's 4 million Filipinos, 2 million in California alone, right? And then the guy goes, "Why are there so many of you here?" Clearly, he has never had lumpia before. I was like, you have another food, huh? And then he goes, and then he asked me that pretty belligerently, and I said, "Sir, we are here because you were there."
That's right.
Right? By the way, I'm in Berkeley, so you know what I'm talking about. In North Carolina, people were like, "What?" And so I said, the Spanish-American War. I don't know if you've seen the copy of the book. That's my handwriting. That's not my thumbprint. That's a step too far for my lawyers. And then when I turned in the manuscript to the copy editors, I love copy editors. Filipinos don't put accents on our Spanish names. So Jose doesn't have an accent on the E. So the copy editor was like, maybe we should put an accent because then you can't pronounce it properly. And I said, I'm Filipino, we don't do that. Well, why not? I guess it's my own way against rebelling against Spanish colonialism. And she was like, that's not enough of an answer. So then, thankfully, I'm friends with Anthony Ocampo, who wrote a book called The Latinos of Asia, Filipinos, who connected me to Anthony Rosa, who teaches at Stanford. He was a linguist anthropologist. Woo! God bless them. And then he called me 3 days later, Jose, so when the Spanish left and the Americans took over the Philippines, when the Americans brought their typewriters had no accent marks. So then I explained that my name is a marriage of Spanish colonialism and American imperialism. And then we go, what? So then for me though, now let's, by the way, if I don't crack jokes, it's over. If I can't laugh about this insane, surreal, weird, I would just leave. So I try to have a sense of humor about it. But to me, what's happening in our country right now is our own inability to face our full history is finally facing us. What did Baldwin say? Americans, white people are trapped in a history that they don't even understand. And yet, in the same way that you don't understand it, you're trapping all of us who do. Now, if white people get to move in the name of industrialization and globalization, in the name of manifest destiny and white man's burden, then why can't people of color move? Right? Why is it that when you move, it's courageous? You know, you're pioneers. We move, what do? Oh, is it a crime? Is it legal? Will we assimilate? You love our food, you love ethnic food, but I'm not sure you love the people that comes with the food. Now, that's not Berkeley, because, you know, I'm in Berkeley, but, you know, in Madison and Kansas, they usually call, you know, security on me when I say this. But look, the only reason for me to stay is if I can actually be honest about what I think and how I feel, and that in itself is my freedom. Yeah.
So I have a background in cultural anthropology as well.
Great.
And studied here at UC Berkeley. And the way that historically the field of anthropology trivialized cultures and peoples all over the world, you know, it has shifted. And I worked with Laura Nader, who was really interested in something she called studying up. And that means studying people who have power instead of studying people who don't have power. And we can define this as a class issue as well, because if you show up with a lot of money, some things are forgiven. If you only show up with energy and enthusiasm and motivation, well, do you have any documents? But I wanted to bring up another term that you had used in your book that I really liked, and that was 21st Century Underground Railroad. So you talked about it in the context of all the different people who stepped up and connected you and offered to help in so many different ways. And I'm just thinking about the overlapping of, you know, the idea of getting somebody from danger to security, from danger to safety. The fact that it, in a way, it needs to cross borders. It needs to cross class borders. It needs to cross some national borders, and certainly cross linguistic borders, cultural borders. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that term. I thought it was so provocative, and that it could really be useful in people's thinking about this. All of us white people.
I was really torn about the term when I first started talking about it, because I wanted to make sure that I was using it without kind of appropriating what that history of the term is. So the first thing I did was I contacted all my mentors who happen to be black, and I said, okay, if I do this, how do I do this as respectfully as possible without feeling like I'm appropriating something? And that was a really interesting conversation, you know? And then I remembered I met this woman in North Carolina. A lot of things happened in North Carolina. This woman who saw me on TV, I guess, and she showed up at this event. And after the event, she called me and she said, Mr. Vargas, I want to talk to you. And then she had a purse. She pulled this really old paper from her purse. It was crumpled. She opened it up. It was a bill of sale. I had never seen one before. And she said, can you compare the papers that my great-great-grandmother got here when she landed in Charleston to the pieces of papers that you and your people can't seem to get? Then she goes, Mr. Vargas, this is bigger than papers. Think bigger. And then she like walked away. And she like dropped the bomb, right? And I was like, well, what? And then I said that to Marcia Davis, who's my editor at the Washington Post, and she was saying, Jose, this is why using terms, you know, respectfully, right, can have that kind of resonance. Because in some states in this country, I remember when Alabama was trying to pass a law that made it illegal for you, who's a U.S. citizen, to drive me, who's undocumented. Harboring laws. Like, you, as employers, you're not supposed to hire us. It's against the law, but we all know you do. Well, some of you, right? Like, I was just in Sonoma County, as I said, and, you know, I don't know where the vineyards would be without undocumented labor. So all of that is apparently against the law, and yet, here we are. So I think I use that term to kind of, because to me, part of what we're not talking about is people like me can't pass and hide our way through America if there weren't Americans helping us pass and hiding us. And I would argue that they're a part of the conversation. If I were to enumerate every single person who's helped me out of all backgrounds, white, black, Native, whatever, there would be like 30 of them. So when you're talking about immigration, then you're not talking about 11 million people. You're talking about 11 million people times 10, times 20. And yet, where is that in this conversation? Why is it that we only focus on the undocumented people, but not to the Americans, who in many ways are part of the conspiracy? Like, I am part of a conspiracy of people who have decided that I was going to be here.
Yep. And I do love that term, because I think it's part of what helps the people who need to pay attention when you use a provocative term, because it allows people to unpack it together. And it even, and when we talk about Black Lives Matter, for instance, it's not black folks have got to tell white folks what they need to do. White folks got to talk to one another and figure out where they stand and what they want to accomplish. And I see you starting to open your mouth.
No, it's okay.
But
because
we need to open up for questions soon.
Because we're in the Bay Area, so I should say this and then we'll take questions. I'm just getting really tired of this binary of black and white in a state where Latinos and Asians and mixed race people are actually consisting the majority. You know why it's not right? Because what we're not addressing is all the anti-blackness in Asian and Latinx communities. We're not talking about that, right? For the most part. Like, we have to actually look at it from a perspective that the white and black binary, Baldwin, when he was in San Francisco, said, there was this great YouTube clip when he says, "I'm only black if you think you're white." Let me repeat this. I'm only black if you think you're white. And yet here we are. Now you have all these Latin Asian people going like, okay, where do we go? I would argue in the book I wrote about how the O.J. Simpson trial was like my first big confusion. Because in my middle school, we stopped the class when the verdict was announced. And the school was like Latino, Asian, black, white. When the verdict was announced, the black students reacted one way, the white students reacted another way, and the Asians and Latinos looked at each other going like, where do we go? That's still where we are, by the way. And so I think it's time that we really reckon with the fact that the country was never just black and white, right?
I think black and white have just come to stand for
so much of this.
Yeah, and you can be Asian or Latino, and or mixed race or Native, and you can be black, and you can be white, depending on the circumstance.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
But
okay, questions.
Let's open it up for questions.
Ooh, I'm looking forward to this. You're all going to ask.
Have a question?
Somebody asked.
Go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question. All right.
She's Filipina. I can spot Filipinos. Kamusta po?
Mabuti. How are you? I just want to know what happened in Sonoma.
A lot. I visited 2 high schools. And Sonoma Valley High School, after my little talk, I had a Q&A from the audience, it was like 700 students. It was all the students. Because I guess somebody bought them the book, which was great. So the first question I got was from a kid named Joe, who was all the way in the back. And Joe, because I said that I had just paid a lot of taxes to the IRS, because it's tax season, and undocumented immigrants pay billions of dollars in taxes, right? I'm happy to pay that because I love public schools, I love public libraries. My grandmother can use a senior center in Mountain View, so I'm happy to pay that. And then this young man, Joe, goes, well, but illegals cost us $100 billion a year. And of course, where did you get that from, Joe? The Daily Wire, which, by the way, is a conservative site. Well, where did the Daily Wire get that information? Well, I don't know. Can you, find out? So this goes on for 5 minutes. The school is 50% white, about 40% Latinx, and I could see all the Latinx students. It was almost like this quiet diminishing thing that was like, you could tell that this has been happening in their classrooms, like when someone brings it up. So after it happened, I talked to the teachers and I said, so when a kid brings that up in school, what do you say? We don't know what to say. Then I asked the vice principal, this really nice guy named Aaron, and he said, well, and I asked, how does this impact the Latinx students? And he said, well, we start seeing them disconnect. Now, it's not a surprise to all of you that Latinx students are going to, already comprise the majority of students in public schools across the state. And you can't undo this. Can you imagine now creating a culture where people feel like they have to be disconnected from where they are? Mind you, the kids are probably all U.S. citizens, but the parents may be undocumented or green card holders or whatever. And it was really staggering to see it like that. And then to see that teachers are really struggling with what to do. And then the driver, I was like, I can drive myself. I love driving. I can drive legally now, so I love driving. But they gave me a driver. I'm like, oh gosh, okay. So then I got driven from that high school to another high school, Sonoma Academy, which is like a really expensive high school in Sonoma. And then in the middle of the drive, the driver says, I've been biting my tongue this whole time. I'm a Trump voter. And I guess he walked in my lecture at a point where I said, I was covering Sarah Palin in 2008 and in Indiana, and there were 20,000 people in this auditorium, and the only people of color were me and Athena Jones from CNN, black woman. So I guess he heard me say this, and then he walked out, he said. And he goes, I just have to ask you, why did you say that about Sarah Palin? I'm like, sir, I was stating a fact. There were 2 people of color, and they were all white. Well, why do you have to say that they're white? Sir, because they are. Well, are you saying that they're racist? Wait, where in our exchange did I say anything about being racist? Well, I mean, I'm assuming that because you had to mention that, you're assuming that, sir, you're the one making assumptions. By the way, he's driving me. So it gets, when there's a stop sign, I'm like, oh shit, where is this? Oh, sorry, another cuss word. There's a young boy sitting here, sorry. And then that's why I said what I said earlier on about we're triggering each other. He couldn't really even hear what I was saying because he already had assumed that I meant another thing. And it was just jarring. And then I went to a high school, this private high school that's really expensive but provides scholarships, where all the white kids are all very fluent on white privilege and white supremacy and carrying a lot of guilt, it seems. A lot of white students came up to me and said, I'm a white person, where do I fit in this conversation? And I said, you have to fit in the conversation. And then I started asking the teachers there, so once they leave the cocoon of this school and they talk to people who don't know what white privilege is, and then what happens? So I guess I'm grappling with, education is so big for me. I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't care about education. And the role of educators at a time like this, right, to me is central. That's why we have to pay teachers more, by the way, because their job, this is hard. I could sense the teachers grappling with it. So that's what happened in Sonoma. I can tell you more later, but yeah, okay. Oh, there were 4 Filipinos that showed up. That was nice, yeah.
Over here.
Hi.
Hi. I'm the owner of a Republican, and by that I mean my father. And I've been in this epic struggle, and I can't repeat the words that I've used because of the company in the front row. But I've gone so far as to break the faucet off the kitchen counter in a rage.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm a really good girl. So it's been intense. And I wonder, have you found any words that have gained traction?
Yes. So actually, and I'm sorry that I'm about to plug this, but go to Define American. We actually have a site called The Gift of Uncomfortable Conversations. And we actually walk you through a graphic of the things to say. But here's the most important thing. Do not walk out. Let me repeat this again. If I can go to Mississippi and talk to people, you can go talk to your dad. Right? So meaning, I say this to a lot of woke people on social media who call people out, strangers on social media, but won't deal with their family members. I'm like, I don't want you to be on Twitter calling a bunch of trolls. Can you go get your dad? Get your uncle. I really think in the same way that the LGBT movement was changed family by family, I think that's part of where this needs to go. So it's pretty specific, you'll see. But again, the challenge is not to walk out. In the same way that I don't go on TV to debate Ann Coulter, they've offered me so many opportunities to debate her. I don't do Ann Coulter. You know, I'm not acting here. Like, she's an actress. Somebody should give her an Oscar. She's been really consistent since I was in middle school. She's been saying what she's been saying. And so I don't deal with people that don't really want to get reach or don't really want to change their minds. But I do think that so much of this is really about how people see themselves in the issue. Right? Where does your dad live? I'm just curious. Oregon. Yes, I was there for 3 months. I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So please check out the website and you'll see it.
Hi, and thank you for being here. So I don't want to sound too nosy, but I'm really curious about your legal status right now. And also you mentioned in the book that there's no line for undocumented people. So have you found a line somehow magical?
No, so I'm 4 months too old for DACA, so I don't have DACA. So I'm undocumented, right? So that's why when I was getting ready to come out, I spoke to like 28 lawyers, immigration lawyers. All but one said, don't do this. Because the moment you come out and you admit to all the fraud, so I did something that you're not supposed to admit to, which I admitted in the book too. Because again, my job is to tell the truth about this. So, you know when you apply for a job, you check like a form, like a box, right? Resident alien, are you a US citizen? What are you? To get jobs, I check US citizen, like a lot. Subway, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Philadelphia Daily News, the Washington Post, Rolling Stone, the New Yorker, the Huffington Post, all of my jobs. And it's the highest offense you can make under immigration law is to claim citizenship when you don't have it. So that's why, for example, even if I married, well, not that I'm seeing, well, you don't need to know that. So like, so even if I were to get married now that it's legal, I still can't adjust my status because I've already admitted to all the fraud I had to do. Bill Hing, I love this guy. To me, one of the unheralded like historians of immigration is a guy named Bill Hing. He's a lawyer at University of San Francisco, Immigrant Law Resource Center. He's a great guy. Please check out his books. I'm actually doing something with him because I think people should know more about his work. So Bill Hing was the only lawyer who said, you should do this. And he called it rebellious lawyering. So now I live in Berkeley. I told the mayor that I'm here. I'm really looking forward to how to engage my fellow neighbors to try to figure out how this city and our area could actually be more of a model, right? Continue to be a model for what this could look like. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Right over here. Hi.
Hi. I tend more towards reconciliation and people getting along and all that, but you were talking about forms that you had to fill, and you filled out forms for employment and all that many times. And so how does it feel actually getting helped or sponsored by the Chronicle when you worked for the Chronicle and the Examiner and they fired you years ago when they found out that you were illegal?
Actually, they didn't. I left the Chronicle to go to the Washington Post. So I was not fired. But let me say this. So when I was, what was that?
But they wrote it kind of like that. The editor wrote
Sir,
it.
do you remember that? You're right. They wrote it like they fired me. They did not fire me. Hello, Chronicle. Thank you for having me in your stage. Facts matter, so you should probably start with that. But thank you, sir, for remembering that. I try not to remember all the bad stuff.
One more. He spoke that I was his mentor and he betrayed me.
Oh, yeah. So actually, this is inside the baseball, but you can probably, I think this is actually an interesting metaphor. So when I was ready to come out, I thought I owed it to the Washington Post because the Washington Post is where I built my career. So I called the editor of the publisher of the Washington Post, Katharine Graham's granddaughter, Catherine Weymouth, and I said, I'm so sorry, I lied, I'm here illegally, I'm about to come out, I want to do it for the Washington Post. So she understood, she then contacted her editor, Marcus Broccoli, who used to be the editor of the Wall Street Journal, Murdoch's Wall Street Journal. And then he said, and then Marcus Broccoli said to me, we can't really trust you to write your story. Can we assign a reporter to interview you about your story? Oh, hell no. And then, so they let me write it, but then they assigned fact checkers to make sure that I wasn't lying about anything else. Hey, how do you trust a liar? Because here's the thing. Newsrooms are run by white people. You know this. When a woman of any race or an LGBT person or a person of color says something, we have an agenda and we have a bias. When white people do it, it's called an analysis.
White men.
Right? White men specifically. We love white men, but we got to do better. So he decided a week before it was going to be published to kill it. And called me and said, I just don't know what we don't know. So then I called the New York Times and said, hey, I have this essay, it's fully edited, it's ready to run, will you publish it? So apparently my essay has the unique distinction of being edited by the Washington Post to run in the New York Times. But look, I have to tell you though, like the fact that when I was at the Chronicle from 2000 to 2004, there were more people of color working in newsrooms then than there are now. And I'm saying this because it doesn't only hurt people of color, it actually also hurts white people, right? When we can't see each other, right, we're hurting. And this is why diversity benefits all of us. And that's why it's not a slice of the pan, it's actually the entire pan. So I wish there were more women. I actually think, the Chronicle is one of the few newspapers that has a woman, Audrey Cooper, running it. It's like 3 of them. It's awful. We need more women and we need more people of color running newsrooms.
All right. Jose, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm signing over there.